Hi everyone, thanks for coming. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce Tom Bissell. Tom is the author of 2 previous books of nonfiction, Chasing the Sea and The Father of All Things, as well as the wonderful short story collection, God Lives in St. Petersburg, which won him many well-deserved accolades. In his newest book, Extra Lives, Tom shares with us his longtime fascination with video games. It's neither a history of the medium, nor a survey of the industry, nor a technical treatise on game design, but rather, it is one man's opinions on what playing games feels like, an examination of why video games matter and why they do not matter more. Whether or not you are already the gaming addict that Tom reveals himself to be, Extra Lives provides a unique view on what these games have become and makes a strong and provocative case for their continuing relevance and significance. Please join me in welcoming to YouTube, Tom Bissell.
Hey everyone, thank you for coming out today. It's a real pleasure to be here. I don't know if the camera's ever gonna turn around and look at this room, but I really like this room because it makes me feel like I'm trying to explain to the Galactic Senate why the Trade Federation invaded Naboo. And I think I could make that case. As Dan said, the game is called Extra Lives, Why Video Games Matter. And a couple of the reviews that I've gotten have claimed to have enjoyed the book, while also expressing some frustration that I don't really make the case why video games matter, that rather I make the case that they matter to me. And I've conceded that point a little bit. I think there's probably something to that. Maybe I do not make that case. So I'd like to take a few minutes before I start actually reading a little brief part of this book, why I think games do in fact matter. So let me just ask the room here. How many of you guys consider yourselves gamers in the room? Wow, it's about half. Interesting. So there'll be some internecine arguments and bloodshed at the end of this session, I hope, while we all debate whether or not they do in fact matter. So the first video game is genuinely regarded as a thing called Tennis for Two, which was invented in the late 1950s by an engineer, the guy who actually invented the timers that were used on the atomic bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki during World War II. He later became an engineer, and so there was some open house, I think at MIT, that they were having, and this guy ginned up this very simple device it was like a proto-Pong that this guy invented. And what's funny about that is, 15 years later, whatever it was when Pong finally went, when Pong dropped nationally, it was still basically the same thing, and so it's these two things shooting a ball at each other. It's repetitive. It's kind of like a digital approximation of an athletic activity. It's repetitive, it's competitive, and it had to do with like the same thing over and over again until someone failed and someone won. So that's how games sort of begin. They begin in this sort of digital approximation of something that happens over and over and over again. And then the next wave of like popular games, you get in the late 1970s, late 1980s, you start seeing games like Donkey Kong and Pac-Man, and suddenly these are goal-oriented activities with a very vague storytelling overlay. Like for instance, Pac-Man has cutscenes, which are interstitial things that go in between bits of gameplay. And so you realize that there's history between Pac-Man and the ghosts. There's something between them. And they've obviously shared there's some bad blood there. And it's not storytelling the way we have traditionally come to understand it, but it's definitely, there's something more to the game than just the activity of going through these passageways, that the game designer actually wants you to feel that there's something narratively going on here. Donkey Kong is the same way. We don't really know why Donkey Kong has captured Mario's girlfriend, but he has, and he has to get her back. And so there's this, why did she fall into his grasp? Why does she maybe not seem like she's fighting it as quite as strongly as she could be? does she actually like Donkey Kong? These are all things you can think about within the parameters of the Donkey Kong story, this kind of vague thing that happens in the game. So then after that, a lot of the big commercial games, the pendulum sort of swung the other way. They were no longer goal-oriented activities with a vague storytelling overlay. They were actually a storytelling medium that was organized around successfully attaining goals. And so this is where the games that I'm kind of interested in come into this, and why I think games matter. And this form of storytelling that games started doing in the early 90s, late 80s, wherever you want to date it from, wasn't really very good for a long time, for all sorts of technical reasons that we can talk about later. But I think we can concede that, you know, the knock on games for a long time was the stories weren't as good as stories in traditional medium because, well, it was a game, the story was supposed to be stupid. It didn't matter. And in a way, it didn't. What did matter if the game was fun. Well, by 2005, 2006, I started to notice that games storytelling was actually getting pretty good, and more designers seemed less satisfied with the "it's a video game, it's supposed to be stupid" approach to game design. And so, why I think games are important is that, however garish and clumsy and sometimes ridiculous they seem, that I do think they constitute an entirely new form of storytelling, and moreover, a really important one, because the rules of this form of storytelling are not really very well established yet. For instance, do you have a silent protagonist or speaking protagonist? Do you use cutscenes or do you not use cutscenes? What is environmental storytelling, and how can games use that to their advantage? How useful is exposition in a game? There's all very within game design circles, these are all semi-heated topics that people are making games endorsing various design principles, and you see these things worked out now just about every year. A couple video games come out that really reset the table when it comes to what we can expect from video game storytelling. And there's not another medium that I know of that is so open to sudden, swift, decisive, game-changing sort of developments. And that's what I find really exciting about it. And this is why I focus in this book on narrative games. It's why I talk about narrative games. Partially because I'm a writer myself. I'm a fiction writer. So storytelling is my fascination. It's my passion. It's what I'm most interested in. So there's a lot of hardcore game people, a lot of people who are serious about their games, who kind of don't like narrative games and think the narrative game is kind of a dead end. And they're more interested in the mechanics of play and how you tell stories just through play, without all this bothersome, clunky storytelling crap that games have never done very well to begin with. And I have sympathy for that position, but I ultimately, for me, I kind of reject it, because I think that there's a reason why the game medium desperately wants to become a storytelling medium. And I think it does, you can see it. And I think it desperately wants to become a storytelling medium because human beings desperately love to be told stories. And so my passion and my argument is that I don't want game narratives to be unnecessarily stupid anymore. And that's kind of why I wrote this book. And I want to distinguish between unnecessarily stupid things in games and things that are kind of core to the game experience. My girlfriend is an actor, and I just came back from Texas seeing her perform in a couple Shakespearean performances, one of which was Much Ado About Nothing, the other of which was Hamlet. And I realized watching these performances that there are all these core artificialities to the stage. Like the Shakespearean soliloquy is about as ridiculous as a convention as you could possibly think. When one character turns to the audience and speaks his heart while people are standing 2 feet away from him, and we're to suppose that this is, that this is not obviously a realistic depiction of what's supposed to be going on in the play world. It's a stylized approximation of something that's going on in the character's head. And so games obviously have this kind of stuff happening all the time. And novels happen in chapters, which is also a very weird, artificially arbitrary kind of convention to the form that we don't really question. So what I think games need to be doing more of is learning how to soften these things that seem ridiculous into things that seem acceptably ridiculous within the medium, and separating those from the things that are unnecessarily ridiculous, and just coming up with some very with stronger ground rules as to how the medium works best. And I'm sure all of you have heard the "Are games art?" question, and I'm not going to address that much beyond to say it's the wrong question. The question is not, are games art? The question is, can artists express themselves through this medium? And I think the answer to that question is absolutely yes. And a lot of the basis of people saying games are not art comes down to this weird misunderstanding that because games are, quote, games, and because they have goals, that like chess or like football or like basketball, they can't really be art. Roger Ebert's position is Michael Jordan's not an artist. And that's true, but Michael Jordan's also not telling a story. And I think any medium that serves as a storytelling medium provides a basis for an artistic experience. Because to me, an artistic experience, whether it's like a good artistic experience or a bad artistic experience or a high or a low artistic experience, to me an artistic experience allows you to go into something created by another person or another group of people and come out of it transformed somehow emotionally. And some games have done that to me. And I'm sure some games have done that to those of you who game. Maybe not as many as we'd like, but it's definitely happened. And so I think the biggest problem, with this question for a lot of people who are ignorant of the medium is that just this term game gets in the way, video game. It just sounds so ridiculous. And I think everyone agrees that it's the worst title for something ever. But I think we're kind of stuck with it. And I'd also remind you that, thinking about movie for a minute it's a pretty dumb name for that medium as well. So a movie is something that moves, and it's better than talkie though, I suppose. So I would hope that at some point this idea of things being games or game-like, that all the childish adolescent associations we have with the idea of games will sort of fade. And I think it's also why video game. In my book, I use the two-word, I represent it as two words, video game, whereas most of the real serious critics and game designers I know all prefer to use the one-word spelling of it. And I now think that the one-word spelling of it is a way to sort of get away from this childish game-like association that we have with them. So I really regret having spelled it with two words throughout this entire book. So the egg is on my face. I'm going to read a little bit of chapter 2, which is a chapter called Headshots. I'm going to read the first half of it. And it's about an experience I had playing games, about 13 years ago now. And some of you may recognize this game, some of you may not. And I will just start. So it begins here. In your stepfather's darkened living room, with you hunched over, watching as a Dateline title card, 1998 July, forcefully types itself across the television screen. 1998 July? Why not England, London? Why not A Time Once Upon? A narrator debuts to describe something called Alpha Teams in medias res search for something called Bravo Teams down Chopper, in what is mouthfully described as a forest zone situated in the northwest of Raccoon City. Okay, this is a Japanese game. That probably explains the year-date swappage. That also makes Raccoon City a valiant attempt at something idiomatically American-sounding, though it is about as convincing as an American-made game set in the Japanese metropolis of Port Sushi. You harbor affection for the products of Japan, from its cuisine to its girls to its video games. The medium Japanese designers have made their own. To your mind, then, a certain amount of ineffable Japanese weirdity is par for the course, even if the course in question has 15 holes, and every one has a par 9. A live action scene commences in which Alpha Team lands upon a foggy moor, finds Bravo Team's crashed chopper, and is attacked by Baskervillian hounds. But all you are privy to is the puppetry of snarling muzzles shot in artless close-up. To the canine puppeteer's credit, the hounds are more convincing than the living actors, whose performances are miraculously unsuccessful. The cinematography, meanwhile, is a shaky cam, Evil Deadish fugue minus any insinuation of talent, style, or coherence. Once the hellhound enfilade has taken the life of one Alpha Team member, the survivors retreat into a nearby mansion. You know that one of these survivors, following the load screen, will be yours to control. Given the majestic incompetence of the proceedings thus far, you check to see that the game's receipt remains extant. For most of your life you have played video games. You have owned in turn the Atari 2600, the Nintendo Entertainment System, the Sega Genesis, the Super Nintendo, and the Nintendo 64, and familiarized yourself with most of their marquee titles. The console you are playing now, the console you have only today purchased, is categorically different from its ancestors. It is called the Sony PlayStation. Its controllers are more ergonomic than those you have previously held, and far more loaded with buttons. And its games are not plastic cartridges, but compact discs. Previous consoles were silent, but your new PlayStation zizzes and whirs in an unfamiliar way as its digital stylus scans and loads. It is 1997. The PlayStation was released to the American market 1 year ago. You miss this, having been away, in the Peace Corps, teaching English, which service you terminated in a panic 16 months short of your expected stay. Now you are back in your hometown, and the house you grew up in, feeling less directionless than mapless, compassless, and lack of any navigational tool at all. You are also bored. Hence the PlayStation. The live-action sequence has given way to an animated indoor tableau of surprising detail and stark loveliness, like no console game you have hitherto encountered. 3 characters stand in the mansion foyer. There is Barry, a husky, ursine, ginger-bearded man. Wesker, enjoying the sunglasses and slick-back hair of a coke fiend. And Jill, your character, a trim brunette looker in a beret. A brief conversation ensues about the necessity of finding Chris, your fellow Alpha Team member, who has somehow managed to go AWOL in the time it took to step across the threshold of the mansion's entryway. Soon enough, a gunshot sounds from the next room. You and Barry are dispatched by Wesker to investigate. The dialogue, bad enough as written, "Wow, what a mansion," is mesmerizing in performance. It is as though the actors have been encouraged to place emphasis on the least apposite word in every spoken line. Barry's "he's our old partner, you know," to provide but one example, could have been read in any number of more or less appropriate ways, from "he's our old partner, you know," to "he's our old partner, you know," to "he's our old partner, you know." "He's our old partner, you know," is the line reading of autistic miscalculation this game goes with. Upon entry into the new room, you are finally granted control of Jill. But how the game has chosen to frame the mise-en-scene is a little strange. You are not looking through Jill's eyes, and movement does not result in a scrolling follow-along screen. Instead, Jill stands in what appears to be a dining room, the in-game camera angling upon her in a way that annuls any wider field of vision. Plenty of games have given you spaces around which to wander, but they always took care to provide you with a maximal vantage point. This is not a maximal angle. This is not at all how your eye has been trained by video games to work. It is as though you, the gamer, are an invisible, purposefully compromised presence within the game world. The room's only sound is a metronomically ticking grandfather clock. You step forward, experimenting with your controller's 17 buttons and noting the responsiveness of the controls, which lends Jill's movement a precision that is both impressive and a little creepy. Holding down one button allows Jill to run, for instance, and this is nicely animated. A pair of trigger buttons lies beneath each of your index fingers. Squeeze the left trigger and Jill lifts her pistol into a firing position. Squeeze the right trigger and Jill fires, loudly, her pistol kicking up in response. All of this, from the preparatory pre-firing mechanic to the unfamiliar sensation of consequence your single shot has been given, feels new to you. Every video game gun you have previously fired did so at the push of a single button. The resultant physics no more palpable or significant than jumping or moving or any other in-game movement. Video game armaments have always seemed to you a kind of voodoo. If you wanted some digital effigy to die, you simply lined it up and pushed in the requisite photonic pin. Here, however, there is no crosshair or reticule. You fire several more shots to verify this. How on earth do you aim? As you explore the dining room, something even more bizarre begins to occur. The in-game camera is changing angles. Depending on where you go, the camera sometimes frames your character in relative close-up, and other times leaps back, reducing Jill to an apparent foreground afterthought. And yet, no matter the angle from which you view Jill, the directional control schema, the precision of which you moments ago admired, remains the same. What this means is that, with every camera shift, your brain is forced to make a slight but bothersome spatial adjustment. The awkwardness of this baffles you. When you wanted Link or Mario to go left, you pushed left. That the character you control moved in accordance to his on-screen positioning, which in turn corresponded to your joystick or directional pad, was an accepted convention of the form. Yes, you have experienced mode shifts in games before, but never so inexplicably or so totally. So far, the game provides no compelling explanation as to why it has sundered every convention it comes across. The dining room itself is stunning, though, reminding you of the flat, lush realism of Myst, a personal computer game your girlfriend adores, but that has always struck you as a warm milk soporific. You have not played a tremendous number of PC games. It is simply not a style of gaming you respond to. You are a console gamer, for better or for worse, even though you are aware of the generally higher quality of PC games. Anyone who claims allegiance to the recognizably inferior is in dire need of a compelling argument. Here is yours. The keyboard has one supreme purpose, and that is to create words. Swapping out keys for aspects of game control, J for jump, lesser sign for switch weapon, strikes you as frustrating and unwieldy, and almost every PC game does this, or something like it. PC gamers themselves, meanwhile, have always seemed to you an unlikable fusion of tech geek and cult member, a kind of mad Scientologist. You glance at the box in which this game came packaged. Resident Evil. What the hell does that even mean? You know this game is intended to be scary. You also know that zombies are somehow involved. The box art promises that much. The notion of a scary game is striking you as increasingly laughable. Well, nothing is more terrifying to you than zombies. Calling a zombie-based game Resident Evil is a solecism probably born of failing to fully understand the zombie. Part of what makes zombies so frightening is that they are not evil. The zombie, a Caribbean borrowing, is in its North American guise a modern parable for, well, there you go. Like all parables, zombies are both widely evocative and impossible to pin down. Part of the reason you purchased this game was because you were curious to see what the Japanese imagination had made of the zombie. This was a culture, after all, that had transformed its 20th century Resident Evil into a giant bipedal dinosaur. On screen, Barry calls Jill over, where he kneels next to a pool of blood. I hope it's not Chris's blood. That's actually a perfect impersonation of Barry, if anyone has played that game. He orders you to press on looking around while he completes his investigation. You are no criminologist, but gleaning the available information from a small, freestanding blood puddle would seem to you an undertaking of no more than 3 or 4 seconds. Barry, though, continues to ponder the hell out of that blood. You have 2 options. Leave the dining room to go back and explore the foyer, where Wesker presumably awaits your report, or go through a nearby side door. You take the side door. Anytime you go through a door in this game, you are presented with a load screen of daunting literalness. The point of view reverts to an implied first person, the door grows closer, the knob turns, the door opens, which is followed by the noise of it closing behind you. Considerable investment has been placed in a dramatic reproduction of this process. The knobs sound as though they were last oiled in the Cleveland administration, and the doors themselves slam shut as though they weigh 500 pounds. The load screen complete, Jill now stands in a long, narrow hallway. The camera looks down at her from an angle of perhaps 70 degrees, which leaves you unable to see either ahead or behind her. You turn her left, instinctively, only to hear something farther down the hall. You hear chewing? No, it is worse than that. It is a wet, slushy sound, more like feasting than chewing. The camera has shifted yet again, allowing you to look down the hall, but not around the corner, whence this gluttonous feasting sound originates. There is no music, no cues at all. The game world is silent, but for your footsteps and the sound you now realize you have been set upon this path to encounter. You panic and run down to the other end of the hall, the feasting sound growing fainter, only to find 2 locked doors. No choice then. You walk, not run, back toward the hallway corner, then stop and go to a subscreen to check your inventory. Your pistol's ammunition reserves are paltry, and you curse yourself for having shot off so many bullets in the dining room. You also have a knife. You toggle back and forth between pistol and knife, equipping and unequipping. You eventually go with the pistol and leave the inventory screen. Jill stands inches before the hallway corner, but it suddenly feels as though it is you standing before Hellmouth itself. Your body has become a hatchery from which spiderlings of dread erupt and skitter. Part of this is merely expectation, for you know that a zombie is around that corner and you are fairly certain that it is eating Chris. Another part is you are not sure you can name it. It is not quite the control and release tension of the horror film, and it is not quite actual terror. It is something else, a fear you can control to a point, but to which you are also helplessly subject. A fear whose electricity becomes pleasure. You raise your pistol, and this is interesting. You cannot move while your pistol is raised. You would not notice this before. You should be able to move with your pistol raised, and certainly you should be able to shoot while moving. This is another convention of the form. In video games, you can shoot your sluggish bullets while running, jumping, falling off a cliff, swimming underwater. On top of this, you have exactly 5 rounds. Zombies are dispatched with headshots. You know that much. But how do you shoot for the head when the game provides you with no crosshair? A scary game seems a far less laughable notion than it did only a few moments ago. You turn the corner to yet another camera change. You have only a second or two to make out the particulars. A tiny room, a downed figure, another figure bent over him, before what is called a cutscene kicks in. The camera closes on a bald humanoid, now turning, noticing you. White head lividly veiny, mouth bloody, eyes flat and empty and purgatorial. There the brief cutscene ends. The zombie, now approaching, groans in thoughtless zombie misery, a half-eaten corpse behind it. You fire, but nothing happens. In your panic, you have forgotten the left trigger, which raises your weapon. This blunder has cost you. The zombie falls upon you with a groan and bites you avidly, your torso transforming into a blood fountain. You mash all 17 of your controller's buttons before finally breaking free. The zombie staggers back a few steps, and you manage to fire. Still no crosshair or reticule. Your shot misses, though by how much you have no idea. The zombie is upon you again. After pushing it away, and there is something rapishly unwholesome about the way it assaults you, you stagger back into the hallway to give yourself more room to maneuver. But the camera switches in such a way as to leave you unaware of the zombie's exact location, though you can still hear its awful, blood-freezing moan, which, disembodied, sounds not only terrifying, but sad. You fire blindly down the hall, toward the moaning, with no guarantee that your shots are hitting the zombie or coming anywhere close to it. Soon pulling the trigger produces only spent clicks. You go to the inventory screen and equip your knife. When you return to gameplay, the zombie appears within frame and lurches forward. You slash at it successfully, blood geysering everywhere, but not before it manages to grab onto you yet again. After another chewy struggle, you back up farther, the camera finally providing you with a vantage point that is not actively frustrating, and you lure the zombie toward you, lunging when it staggers into stabbing range. At last, the creature drops. You approach its doubly lifeless husk, not quite believing what is happening when it grabs you by the leg and begins, quite naturally by this point, to bite you. You stab at this specimen of undead indestructibility until, with a final anguished moan, a copious amount of blood pools beneath it. What new devilry is this? None of it has made sense. Not the absurd paucity of your ammunition stores, not the handicapping camera system, not the amount of effort it took to defeat a single foe, not that foe's ability to play dead. You know a few things about video game enemies. When they are attacked, they either die instantly or lose health. And for foes as tough as this one, you are typically able to track the process by way of an on-screen health bar. This zombie, however, had no health bar. Neither do you, properly speaking. What you do have is an electrocardiographic waveform that is green when you are at full health, orange when you are hurt, and red when you are severely hurt. Not only is this EKG stashed away in an inventory subscreen, it provides only an approximate state of health. Right now your health is red. But how red? You have no idea. This game is rationing not only resources, but information. When video game characters die, furthermore, they disappear, like raptured Christians or Jedi. Your assailant has not disappeared, and instead remains face down in a red pool of useless zombie plasma. This is a game in which every bullet, evidently, will count. This is also a game in which everything you kill will remain where it falls, at least until you leave the room. You stab it again. Revenge! You flee the hallway and return to Barry. Before you can tell him what has happened, the door behind you opens. The zombie whose deadness was a heliocentric certainty has followed you. You, not Jill, you, cry out in delighted shock. Your worried stepfather, a few rooms away, calls your name, his voice emanating from a world that, for the last half hour, has been as enclosing but indistinct as an amnion. After calling back that you are okay, you are newly conscious of the darkness around you, the lateness of the hour. For the first time in your life, a video game has done something more than entertain or distract you. It has bypassed your limbic system and gone straight for the spinal canal. You lean back, cautiously. You are 23 years old. You have played a lot of games. Right now, all those games, all the irrecoverable eons you have invested in them, seem to you, suddenly, like nothing more than a collective prologue. Thank you. So I suspect I might be probably one of the older people in the room. And so I'm curious as to how many of you actually played Resident Evil, the first one when it came out. And do any of you remember it feeling like sort of mind-blowing, what it was like? I think we all have like our own resonant examples of games that sort of kind of impressed upon you, like, goodness gracious, this is no longer Dig Dug. This is something really sort of intense and weird. And for me, Resident Evil was that game. It's not even a particularly good game in a lot of ways. In fact, I go on in this chapter to just, excoriate its, terrible, terrible dialogue and absolutely ridiculous narrative. But, the one thing that it did really well, that sense of immersion combined with just the terror of not... Well, in a horror movie, the protagonist is always safe, because protagonists don't die. But in a horror video game, you're the protagonist, and you can die. And it just creates this totally different expectation of fear. And I also explained that the other thing that it did was, it was so hard to save your progress in the game through a very complicated in-game mechanic of how you actually saved your progress, that as I write in this chapter, I've had like friends have died, and I've had relationships end, and I've run out of money, and had terrible experiences, and I would still place being torn apart by zombies with an hour and a half of unsaved Resident Evil gameplay behind me as like in the upper quartile of the most miserable experiences of my life. It was so demoralizing and so infuriating when that happened. So that's from the second chapter of the book, and it's really like the only pre-2006 game that I really get into very much. And so it's very much a book about today's games. But I really think a lot of today's games, not that they're like Resident Evil very much, but to me, Resident Evil is the first game that I was very consciously being told a full-blown, narratively ambitious story. The fact that the narrative ambition was preposterous and the story itself sucked did not change the fact that it was a really ambitious attempt to do something in the medium that like very few games had before it had tried, and certainly no game that I happened to play. With that, I would love to talk some games or answer some questions, and argue with anyone who thinks games don't matter, if anyone feels like doing that. Yes, sir?
I'm curious to hear your opinion on the kind of contemporary argument about what's the best use of tool or combination of experiences for young adults. Obviously there's a role of video game play in the maturing of the young adult's mind versus more active types of reading or other types of intellectual stimulation. Just curious to hear your thoughts on how video games play into that whole developmental type of argument.
Yeah, I would have to think, based on the little that I have read on this subject, that I just can't imagine a lot of video game playing is good for young adults. I just don't think it's probably very good for them for all sorts of reasons. Games should be a part of a rich cultural diet that people have. I mean, I grew up playing games, and I also grew up a huge reader. I don't think it's impossible. I think it's probably slightly more unusual. And as games, let's face it, the games that I played when I was a kid, they weren't really, you couldn't really play them for more than a couple hours without going mad from boredom. Once you'd had Pitfall Harry go through the entire thing, and you'd recycled yourself back at the beginning of the map in Pitfall, there wasn't a whole lot to get out of that game. If I had to deal with something like, some of these multiplayer online games where you just sit there with your friends for hours and every time you play it's a new map and you're doing something different, yeah, I don't know if my mind would have really withstood that. So I think if I had kids, I would really seriously limit their game playing time. I just can't imagine it's good for them. Which isn't to say that video games are bad a priori. I just think that they should be part of a healthy, balanced cultural lifestyle. And a part of a balanced entertainment intake. And I also wouldn't let kids play, super violent games until it was appropriate time for them to play them. And the fact that that's even controversial at all seems kind of nuts to me. People say games don't make kids violent. It's probably true, but I just think mowing down, hundreds of people every day for hours, maybe it doesn't turn them into killers, but I can't imagine it's going to turn them into Rhodes Scholars either. So that's my take on that. And most of the games that I like aren't for kids. you know, they're just not. And the people who make them say, these are not kids' games. We don't want kids playing them. So, yeah. Anyone else? Oh, yes.
I was wondering about the one thing you mentioned with the Resident Evil, the big hit, was the hour and a half since you save, and then you lose it. There's a sense in modern single player games where the publisher wouldn't get away with that save mechanic anymore.
It's true, but one game did it. Demon Souls. Did you play that?
No, down to PS3.
It's a PS3 game that was old school, crushing, hardcore. If you fuck up, you lose hours of progress. It was great, actually. I loved that game. My girlfriend almost broke up with me during the time I was playing it too, because she said I was just going to bed mumbling at night, like I was just so crazy about that game. And I'm really glad games don't do that anymore. I'm really, really, really glad. But it's very cool to play a game that occasionally comes along and says, hey, you remember this style of gameplay? We're going to give it to you again.
But, I mean, do you think your enjoyment was partially this kind of throwback thing, or do you think it was more that there is genuinely something about that kind of game?
Well, it makes you very careful, and it makes you very tense. And so, but tense in a way that, like Resident Evil and Demon Souls are both fair. They don't like arbitrarily do stuff. They make you pay attention, and they make you really go slow and pay close watch on everything that's going on around you. And as long as a game's fair about its sternness, I don't really have a quarrel with it. But I think a lot of the older games were just hard for the sake of being hard. And they would throw these really arbitrary kinds of things at you they weren't hard in a fun way. They weren't hard in a way that rewarded paying close attention. And I think that's where a lot of game designers kind of got hung up. They thought hardness was the thing to pursue rather than the encouragement of paying attention. And those are two different qualities, I think. So I will occasionally treat myself, and most of the games that do that are Japanese. I mean, that's the Japanese style of game design. They like hard games. They're into that. And Western game design has moved away from it. And I think there's probably like a middle ground somewhere between the two. Because there's something about a lot of games, a lot of them are pretty easy, but at the same time, these guys want the games to be more accessible, and they want people to be able to enjoy them. You don't feel like you're getting frustrated at this thing that you've paid this money for. So I kind of see all sides of this argument simultaneously. I don't really know if there's a right answer. I think it's just how the game approaches it. Because it's an aesthetic decision, and if it's an aesthetic decision that has like a solid foundational grounding to it, then I think if it's thoughtfully done, it's totally legit any way you want to do it. Yes. Green shirt.
Yeah, do you know of any instances where the story has originated in a video game and then gone on to other media?
Well, you mean like movies being made from games?
Yeah, or books or that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean like, most of the times in which that's happened, it's all been like really pulpy genre, sci-fi stuff. But has there been like the Halo series has got a zillion novels coming out. Mass Effect has got, most games are genre games. That's just something you have to wrap your head around as a gamer. And the great weirdness of my life is that I'm not really interested in sci-fi film or literature that much. And I don't even like fantasy that much, but I do like games. And so I get almost all of my genre nutrition from the game genre, and I read almost no sci-fi. In fact, I don't even remember the last sci-fi novel I read. So there's lots of that stuff, but I don't really know of any work that is kind of, I think I know what you mean, and I don't think there's ever really been a game story that has been into non-genre mainstream mediums, other mediums. But I heard this new movie, Scott Pilgrim, although it comes from a comic book, it's one of the first films not based on a video game to actually use video game grammar to tell the story. That there's lots of video game imagery in it, like health meters of characters on screen, you see stuff like that, and I heard it's pretty wild, and it for people of our generation who can look at that stuff and not automatically assume the apocalypse is going to happen the next day, that I think I'm really looking forward to it, to actually see a movie that has nothing to do with games actually use the grammar of the medium in a way that feels fresh. I think that could be pretty cool. So I'm really looking forward to that. You had a question, sir? Yes?
Yeah, so it seems like for a game to be more than just, a game that tells a story to be more than just a collection of cutscenes that are stitched together, you have to give the player some amount of control over the narrative. So what do you think of the argument that if you give control over the narrative, then it can't have the same emotional impact? That you can have a tragedy if the person can just replay it and do it a different way. So you can't have something like Hamlet, where the tragedy comes from the fact that there's only one way the narrative could have unfolded.
I think that's absolutely true. Games who are trying to be resonant in that way are doomed. But games have all sorts of other resonances. Say you spend a lot of time in game design creating a relationship between characters, right, that you like. The characters are well drawn, they're interesting, they're surprising, they're not just crappy versions of action film. So and say you make losing one of those characters an irrevocable decision, or an irrevocable event, that if you lose this character, you lose them. You can't go back and you have one save slot per game, and anyone you lose along the way, they're gone. You can only get them back if you start over from the beginning of the game. That's a whole different kind of resonance. And in a moment like that, where something like that happens, it's not going to be Hamlet, but it's not supposed to be. Hamlet's a totally different kind of aesthetic experience. But gameplay that actually assigns your agency an awful lot of in-game meaning, that actually really doesn't screw around with the decisions you make, that actually says, you're going to make some choices, and they're going to be difficult, and they're going to have real consequences, not consequences you can just kind of go back and reload. I think that is a really valuable kind of resonance, that's a kind of thing that only a game can really give you.
But that makes for, then you end up with something like Demon's Souls, where it's an incredibly frustrating game that a lot of people are not going to bother playing, right? Like if you take away that ability to kind of go back and change things, which it seems like you have to do to get that resonance, that's a game that not a lot of people are even going to bother playing.
Well,
if you play Demon's Souls, it's a game you have to have enormous time, precisely because everything, is so difficult and your choices have such meaning.
Yeah, I don't think it's I don't think irrevocability of that kind is not necessary. I mean, here's the thing. Yeah, as a game designer, you can think, well, people can just go back and reload it and experience it again. But when I play games, I don't do that. I try to honor the vision of the designers, and I try to resist that game temptation of just revisiting things that I did to see how they work out a different way. And so I think game designers, in my opinion, spend too much time anticipating the kid who wants to pee in the pool and figuring out ways to foil the kid who wants to pee in the pool. Thereby, and by doing that, they kind of make all the rest of us suffer through all the firewalls that they're putting up around this kid. And I kind of think that if some people want to break the game, you can't really protect. You can't really worry about that. And so I think all you can do is just design and encourage the player to sort of want to believe in the fictional primacy of the world and not want you to violate it. And that's really the best you can do. And you can just hope that people kind of go through with generally what you're trying to intend for them to experience. So you don't have to go the cruel Demon's Souls path. That you can actually also take a somewhat gentler path and not worry too much about that thing. I mean, I don't know. I don't think there's a good answer to this question. And I think it's a kind of game by game issue that you have to approach. So I hear you that there doesn't seem to be a very satisfactory answer here, but I do think that there are all sorts of kinds of resonances that are unique to games, and that those are the kinds of experiences that I love about games. And
I guess a kind of follow-up question: what are some modern games that you think have emotional impact comparable to a good novel, or not even comparable to a good novel? What modern games have emotional impact? Period.
Yeah, I would never say comparable to a good novel because again, those are two totally different.
Comparison. What games have emotional impact?
Portal, I thought was a tremendously moving game that really just freaked me out. There's a game called Far Cry 2, which just left me completely drained and run out by the time I played it, and I felt utterly ashamed and disgusted with the game is just about relentless slaughter that it slowly convinces you that slowly impresses upon you that unlike most shooters in which you're the good guy, Far Cry 2 gradually sort of piles upon you the realization that you're the bad guy. And that's a really novel kind of thing for a game to do. You're not like an anti-hero, you're actually the problem. And I love that about it. I thought there was stuff in GTA 4, Grand Theft Auto 4 that made me laugh and troubled me. I thought BioShock was a tremendous game for the first 80% of it. Left 4 Dead has given me some unbelievably gripping, visceral experiences with friends of mine. Mass Effect is kind of a corny space opera, but because it commits so much to its characters and its pretty good story, that there were moments in that where I was just absolutely riveted. And I've never felt guilty about spending time on games that give me like a valuable kind of storytelling experience. It's the games that I kind of am more and more less satisfied with are these hyperkinetic Call of Duty style games that don't really give your heart or mind enough time to really like absorb anything, where it's just like relentless push you through a roller coaster and hope you come out more or less in one piece at the end of it. I'm less and less satisfied with that style of game design. And I really like games that are maybe a little bit slower and maybe a little bit more mischievous about how they want to play with your emotions. I mean, have you had Resident game experiences or
Yeah, I have. It's funny that you mentioned some of those games you mentioned, like Far Cry. I mean, I haven't played that, but I wouldn't have thought of that because that to me just sounds like another shooter.
So I think it's the best shooter ever made, personally. I do.
Let's check it out.
Yeah, it's really fantastic. It's kind of slow. It takes a little while to get going, but once it gets going, it's pretty great. Yes.
I was going to mention Shadow of the Colossus.
Oh God, yeah, I should have mentioned that one right off the bat. Yeah, that game's of a whole another level of emotional impact. Has anyone played that game?
What's the name of it again?
Shadow of the Colossus. It's kind of like a famous game that everyone who loves games loves today, but it was sort of a commercial disaster when it came out. It didn't sell well in this country at all because it was so ahead of its time. It's just a game about loneliness and sadness, and takes the single corniest thing of the video game medium, the boss fight, and it just makes it about nothing but boss fights. And the bosses are actually these big, lovely, lumbering creatures that seem to bear you no harm, and yet you have to kill them one by one. And so there's this level of ambiguity and questioning about what, and it does this with very little dialogue, very little explicit storytelling. All the storytelling is environmental. It's all sort of this combination of the visual presentation of the game and what you're projecting onto it emotionally. And it's this unbelievably haunting, weird experience that, at the end of the game, I was kind of a wreck. It's a really special piece of it's a really special game, and they're remaking it for PS3, I've heard, which I'm going to be on that like white on rice as soon as that comes out. Yes?
I mean, could you contrast the advertising done in movies, advertising done in video games? What is the size of the market? What are the growth rates?
I don't really have those numbers at the top of my head, but I do know that games make more than Hollywood last year and the year before that.
Ads? No, I'm talking about ads.
Ads.
Like, say, if you watch the movie Transformers, you see Chevy cars, the brand new Chevy cars. So Chevy had obviously paid some money to the movie producer to place it. The similar thing is done on the video games also.
Well, I do know that I was once playing a driving game called Burnout Paradise, in which is like you're driving around in a city looking for races. It's kind of an open world driving game, which is sort of an interesting thing. And I'm driving down the street one day and I see an Obama 08 sign on one of the billboards. And I literally, I actually have the nerdy driving steering wheel. So I hit the gas, hit the brake, and I'm like, what? And I was looking at this thing, and the game had come out like 2 years before, and maybe a year before. And I saw an Obama 08 billboard, and I thought that was the greatest thing. So, games don't have that kind of in-game advertising very often right now. Sports games do somewhat, but I don't really know any of the advertising statistics. It's just not really my area of knowledge on this. But that's a weird thing with games. It's basically the most profitable storytelling medium in the world, and yet they're still weirdly culturally invisible in some very curious way that no one has really been able to figure out. Games have a very hard time shaking this stigma that they're for 13-year-old boys. Some of them are, and a lot of 13-year-old boys play them, but the statistics just don't back that up. The average age of a gamer is in his mid-30s. And most of the, like more and more, it's like 60-40 men to women. So yeah, someone back there, yeah.
I was just wondering, as the focus, I mean, it already is in Asia, and it's beginning to more and more shift that way in North America. The focus shifts more towards competitive gaming and team play and competitions and actually leagues in a sense. What do you think that does to storytelling and the storytelling in games, and what do you think it does to the video game industry in general?
Yeah, I think those games are not. Those games are like sports, and they have their place.
Shooters like Major League Gaming. And
yeah.
Those guys.
Yeah, those. I get kind of upset when, and I play multiplayer shooters online. I play them with my friends. I have a good time, but I don't go to that kind of a game experience for anything emotionally resonant. Just like I don't go see Transformers 2 if I want to like, have a thoughtful experience at a film. I mean, games have the same. No, they're not the same, but they have a comparable spectrum of sophistication of Hollywood movies. Some action-oriented stuff is actually really smart and fun. Some of it is complete cynical shit, and some of the like serious stuff is pretentious, bloated, and dreadful, and some of the serious stuff is actually really brilliant. And so the whole rise of the competitive sporting thing, I can say that even though I play multiplayer competitive games, that world has absolutely zero appeal to me, and just personally, I don't doubt anyone else's interest in it, but for me, I do think the multiplayer thing is becoming really kind of ridiculous, though, because I think people are putting multiplayer options in games that have no use for them. And so what this means is that lots of publishers' resources are going toward a thing that no one's going to play for reasons they don't even really... They're just doing it because they think it's like commercial, will increase gameplay longevity. But I don't know. I think the multiplayer thing is a weird, unexpected development that is in the last 10 years has really kind of distorted a lot of game experiences.
Probably time for one more.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you think online games matter?
You mean like competitive things?
Yeah.
Like
anything in a flash little.
Oh, those kind of games.
Yeah.
I don't see why there can't be like really valuable aesthetic experiences to be had in Flash games. I've not played that many of them, but I've seen some really cool stuff. I think the storytelling model, the big bloated AAA storytelling model of game design is far from the only viable way. I just write about those games because I find them easiest and most pleasant to write about for me personally. But I've seen some Flash games that are terrific, actually. I think any time anyone wants to create an experience for another person to have that rearranges their mind or enchants them or fills them with like anxiety or scares them any time you're trying to share an aesthetic experience with another person, that matters, I think. And I think that's why games matter to me. That's what I want. I want more of that from my entertainment with games. Are we done?
I think we're done. Thanks
Okay,
everybody.
thank you guys.